Although I could never swim, I did have a fascination and a love for the water. And like these kids in the photograph, we used to spend a lot of time on the landings, which were quite regular around the edge of the river. You might note on the right-hand side of the picture there is a man standing on what is actually a floating log platform, which was just to the rear of the Wardle's sawmills. And we used to wade around there when the water would allow us and play on the log platform as though it was our raft. And then occasionally we would also find that when the foy boatmen would tie up their boats alongside the landing, it was not uncommon for us to pinch the boats and go way out into the river and play around in the river. Until such times, of course, we were picked up by the river police and given a clip around the ear and sent home again. Although we were poor, I cannot really say that I had an unhappy childhood, because I didn't. All my pals were in the same boat as we were, none of us any better off than the other, and therefore we came to regard our standard of life as being the norm, nothing out of the ordinary. And I cannot ever remember my parents making an issue and making us aware of their hardship and heartbreak that they had in trying to rear us with so little. I mean, when the Christmas catalogue hampers used to come, I do believe that they were paid off with unpaid rents because they didn't have much spare cash. But the bairns wouldn't go without at Christmas. Not that we got much, but we got something. I remember my mum too being very persistent in chasing after the local police benevolent fund, who used to run a shoeless children fund for people such as I. And she would get down there ahead of the queue and make sure that I got a pair of boots, for some time, at least a pair a year. But for some reason she would never actually believe that I had large feet, and she would insist on having me fitted out with a pair of boots at least one size too small for me. And oh, how painful that was. How painful. I could never figure out why she did it. But I do know the suffering that I had in trying to wear them. And then my dad taking them at night time, filling them up with water and letting them stand and soak through the night, so that when I went to school the next morning, I would put a pair of wet, soggy boots on, with the fond hope that, as I was wearing them, they would stretch to my size. But they never really did. Not completely. And oh, how I used to look forward to the summer of those days when we could play out, me and my pals, without boots on. Play out on your bare feet on the warm pavement. What a delight it was to get those flaming boots off. This shot is taken of the tramcar terminus at the Ridgeway at the top of King George Road. You may sometimes wonder when you're driving down King George Road why it is that the centre of the dual carriageway has a lot of grassland and shrubbery. Well, it's because, as you can see here, it actually replaced what was the original tramline tramway, which used to run the full length from Ridgeway down to Westow. On the right-hand side you might see a little bit of spare ground, which is currently occupied by the White Ensign pub and the Ridgeway petrol station. That last shot of the tramcar at the bottom of Ridgeway takes me back and reminds me of a tale of when I'd be about, perhaps 7, 8 years of age. Because of my poor health and because of the lack of food, I suffered a little from malnutrition. My mother had managed to get me a place at what was then known as the Open Air School, which was a school situated at the foot of Cleedon Hills. And its purpose was to take in young children like myself and give them a few weeks of so-called country fresh air, but most importantly to feed us with regular, well-substantiated meals. I remember on one occasion And it must have been perhaps because the teacher wouldn't give me the freedom of going to the toilet when I needed to go. I remember eventually making it to the toilet, perhaps at a playtime, and getting there, but it was far too late. I had, in fact, dirtied my trousers, and I was so embarrassed, so humiliated. What on earth was I going to do? My underpants were full of dirt. I couldn't figure out that I would go back to the classroom and reveal my embarrassment to the teacher and the class. So I remember then taking off my underpants, these long underpants kept up with the braces down to my knees, rolling them up, dirt as well, didn't have the sense to clear them out, but rolling them up, a parcel of dirt, and sticking it under my arm and walking out of school out the back way without being seen. And I remember setting off for home, not knowing where home was. I'd never ever been away from home before, and Clevedon Hills to me was the other side of the world. I remember coming down the Ridgeway and finding where the tram cars were, and then setting off to walk home, which I did do hours later, much to the consternation of my mother, who found me at the door of the house and saying, "What the hell are you doing here? I thought you were at school." And I explained to her what had happened. "But how did you find your way home?" she said. I said, "Oh, it was quite simple, ma'am. I just followed the tram wires that was over my head and followed them all the way downtown." And that was quite a remarkable achievement, because what I didn't realise at the time is the tram wires went in all directions, from Westow to Tynedock and Jarrow and things like that. But by some good fortune, I'd followed the right set of tram wires and found myself way back home, some 3-4 miles away. Never forget that. Never forget that. Walking through the length of Shields with a parcel of shit under my arm. The top end of Myland Road, where I used to live during my very early childhood. And on the left you can see ladders up against the wall, which was the beginning of the demolition of the whole area after we had been moved up to Clevedon Park. On the right hand side you see a bank of shops, at which there was attached a little story. It was quite common in those days for shops such as greengrocer shops to advertise their wares by drawing lettering on the window with simple whitening powder, and all the, cabbages, threepens and potatoes, what have you, on the window. And it was popular for people of my age and my temperament to run past the window and rub the whitening off to annoy the shopkeeper. But on one particular day we were running past the shops and we had rubbed the whitening off onto our hands, and as we were running past the other shops, I thought it would be a good idea to hit the window and leave an imprint of my hand on the window, which was a chemist shop next door. And I ran past and hit the window, and I heard this terrible crash, and the window just shattered and just dropped. And of course I was horrified, and I shot away up and around the corner before anybody could see me, recognise me or even catch me, and away I went up through the back lanes and ran like a rabbit to get away from there as quickly as I could. And eventually I came around through the other back lanes and headed back to my house. And lo and behold, when I ran up the back lane to where I lived and went up the stairs, I'm moving into the sitting room of the house, and there inside the sitting room talking to my father was a constable, a policeman, standing. And I remember my dad saying to me, "And what have you been up to now?" And I thought, by God, that was quick. And I was just about to blurt out the whole bloody story, which would have incriminated the family and with high cost, which they couldn't afford to replace, when the policeman saw my consternation, not realising why I was so concerned, and he said, "It's all right, son, I've just come here to see you about a pair of boots from the Shoeless Children Fund." And what a relief that was. My father never knew how close he was to paying the bill for replacing that broken window in the chemist shop. I remember one thing in particular. As I say, in the times of hardship, I remember coming in the house one day, and I would be perhaps round about the 5 years of age, and the mum saying to me, "Oh, I wanted to go down to the corner shop, Bill. There's a man down there, the fellow that has the shop, Mr. So-and-so. He's got something for you. Tell him that you're Billy Moore and you've come down to collect what he has for you." And I didn't have a clue what she was on about, and away I went down to the shop and went in. My mum said, "You've got something for me. What's your name, son?" "I'm Billy Moore." "Oh, yes, I've got just the thing. If you look over in the corner there, you'll see something that's been put there for you." And I looked around the shop, and there across, it was a little sweet shop and a newspaper shop. Quite unusually, there in the corner of the shop was a pedal car, an old, battered pedal car. But to me, it was a Rolls Royce. "That's for you," he said, "son, that's for you. I want you to take it home and show your mum." Little did I know that my mum had actually, again, dodged paying the rent, and because it was a second-hand item, she managed to buy it off this fella for me, and it was her delight to send me down to go and collect it for myself. I remember getting in this little car and pedalling home. What a thrill, what a treat. And how I was envied by my pals that, "Hey, Billy Moore's got a pedal car." Now, we lived in a terraced house type of street, and it came up to a really long incline at the top of the street, a bank. And Billy being what he was, we shared the joy of having a car with his mates. And away we used to go to the top of the bank, and I used to get in my car and take my feet off the pedals and have my pals, one sitting on the, what I call the bonnet of the car, somebody standing on the back bumper, and away we would go hurtling down this bank at about 60 miles an hour, 3 or 4 of us on this little pedal car, and away we'd push it back up to the hill and get in again and go down again. You see, it wasn't enough to pedal around. It was something that even in those days we speeded around. But being what I was, the pals wanted to try, and yeah, go on, have a go. But like a bloody fool that I was, they used to get in the car and I used to push them back up the hill. And this went on. They would ride down and I would push them back up, and they would ride and I'd push them back up. And it wasn't long before I found that I actually caused a rupture of myself. I burst, a rupture, and I was dragged into the house and then whipped away to hospital, and had an operation for a hernia, and I still have the scars today to prove it. Would you believe it? When I came out of hospital, I didn't have a car. My mother had said, "If that's what a bloody car's going to do for you, it's gone. I'm not having you killing yourself for the benefit of other people." And I thought, there, happiness, but short-lived. I was reflecting the other day as I was driving across the bridge on River Drive, and it always takes me back to a particular set of memories when I lived down here during my early years. And of course I remember the time when the corporation had decided to build a road from the marketplace up over the Green Hill and down towards the Groyne and the beach area. And of course that entailed the building of a bridge in order to encompass the existing railway line that came up from the Shield station up to a turntable where the locals had to drive up to be turned around and then to go back on the return journey to wherever they came from. It was decided that the best thing we could do with the bridge was to actually climb up onto the fore part of the structure to get up onto the flat area, and then actually decide to crawl up to the top of the bridge and down the other side. And when I think of that, I mean, as an adult now, to consider climbing up the bridge And when you look down from the bridge, not only down to the pavement that you left, but over the railing, that if you bounced off and went below onto the railway lines below, the drop would be somewhere in the region of a couple of 100 feet at least. But to us that was all the more exciting. We didn't envisage the danger. We didn't envisage the fact that even when you got on the top of the bridge on a windy day, not only might you fall off, but you could be blown off. But we never cared about that. So we would do what we call a bunk up. We'd stand with our back to the base of the bridge, get the lads to put their foot in, up or there, step on your shoulders and climb up onto the top of the bridge. And away we would go, get the gang up, the 5 or 6 of us, and up to the top of the bridge we would crawl and climb, and having got there, we'd slide down on our backsides down to the other side. And having done that, we'd do the same thing in reverse, backwards and forwards, and backwards and forwards. It was hilarious, and at the same time it was exciting. And of course it wasn't just something that we did. Other gangs around the area saw what was going on, and a lot of the kids would climb up and climb over the bridge and put their lives at risk. And the corporation got wind of the idea, and they thought, well, we've got to stop this because there's going to be a terrible accident. And what they had to do to deter us was to, as you'll see, they would paint the base of the archway of the bridge with this, what I call like burglar retardant paint. It was like a thick, gooey black mess that you couldn't cross it, you couldn't stand on it, it would stick to your shoes. It was like glue or wet toffee, and on your clothing and your hands, and you couldn't wash it off. So it was an effective deterrent because that brought an end to our games. The climbing of the bridge ceased. But we weren't going to give in so easily, because what we then did, someone thought of the grand idea, because in those days when we used to go to the pictures on a Saturday morning, Tarzan was one of the favourites. And we thought, hey, we could play Tarzan here, because if we can get some rope, which we did do, we went down to the dockside and found stretches of rope and pinched them from there and tied them all together to make a long rope and fastened it to the rails above the railway lines and threw it over, and then we could run down to the bottom and get this rope and drag it up to the embankment on one side and swing across to the embankment on the other side. And of course, being like a pendulum, you would swing backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. It was fantastic. Everyone would have a turn and things like that. We thoroughly enjoyed it, and that went on for quite some time. But I recall one incident that affected me. Foolish, of course, and it was just bad timing, because I got on the rope and I'm doing what I call my turn, my swing, from one embankment to the other side. But as you know, when you're swinging on the end of a rope, you become a pendulum. And when you swing, you can't stop midway. You just have to continue the swing, and when it gets to the other side, it would swing back. Just as a pendulum would, you're going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. Well, I shot off from one side of the embankment across the railway line and swung up to the other side, and of course I began my journey back on the return pendulum swing. But at that time, which was unforeseen by me, I'm looking up the railway line. I could hear a locomotive coming down the line towards me, and I was terrified, absolutely terrified, because I thought the loco would actually strike me and knock me off the rope and kill me, and I was terrified. But in fact, I was very fortunate in the sense that it turned out that the length of the rope was adequate, that when the train approached me, in fact, I was high enough up the rope not to be struck. The train went under my feet. But what it did do, I missed the blow, but what it did do was I was engulfed in the smoke, the soot, the steam, the filth that came from the train, and like that. And after it had passed, and the fellow blowing his whistle and shaking his hands at us, I came out there absolutely black as midnight, covered in soot, steam. I was saturated with water, my clothes were soaking. I was really in a right mess, but I was alive and happy, And what a cheer went up when I got back to the lads. Good old Bill had just managed to do it, but it's something we didn't try too often. But nevertheless, I can't ever forget when I crossed the bridge of that incident of the train coming for me on the end of this rope.